Good evening and welcome to the regular Livonia Public Schools Board of Education regular meeting for February 18th, 2025. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Gladly. Mrs. Burton.
Here.
Mrs. Frank.
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Here.
Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. McFarland.
Here.
Mrs. Acosta is here. President Bradford.
Here, we have a quorum. I have some extra special guests here this evening that they are going to help us out with the Pledge of Allegiance. We have the Webelos troop from Hayes Elementary here tonight. I had a wonderful evening just a few minutes ago explaining the Board of Ed, the President's job and the Board of Education's role at Livonia Public Schools, and they asked some of the most wonderful questions. So I appreciate you taking all that time with me and asking me all sorts of questions. So thank you for being here. But they are going to stand up now. Please stand up. Come on up. And we're thrilled you're here. Come on up towards the podium here. And you're going to lead us in the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. Great job, you guys. All right. Good evening again. If you'd like to follow along with tonight's meeting and you're joining us in person, you can go out the doors, and to the left you'll find a copy of the agenda on the table. If you're joining us from home, you can go to our LPS website at www.livoniapublicschools.org, click on the School Board tab, go down to the board meeting information, and you will find our agenda for the evening. All right. Tonight's a regular meeting or a voting meeting. If you've tuned in to watch this meeting, you may notice that there's not a lot of discussion happening on some of the items. That is because we have seen and discussed these items multiple times prior to this meeting. If you wish to hear, mainly it's at our study sessions and our committee of the whole meetings. If you wish to hear more regarding these items, we ask that you go back and watch the committee of the whole meeting. That can be found on our website and via YouTube, and I believe our Livonia cable channel. So those, you'll find a much more richer discussion on some of these items. Mainly tonight's our voting meeting. So we are going to go ahead, and with that, I want to welcome all the parents of the students in our troops here tonight too. Thank you for being here and bringing your scouts. We also will take a break after item 3C, the district update from the superintendent, so that we can congratulate. We have some special items going on tonight. It's our Principals Week recognition, so and we have our Webelos here, so we're going to take a quick break after item 3C. So with that, we'll move on to item 3A, and that would be 3A, the official nomination of candidates for the 2025 MASB Board of Directors, Region 8. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Burton, sorry.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District designate Roderick Means as the Region 8 candidate for the MASB Board of Directors and direct the Executive Assistant of the Board of Education to cast the vote accordingly.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the official nomination of candidates for the 2025 MASB Board of Directors, Region 8. Just some information about that. Let's see. We have to annually select, our Michigan Association of School Boards has a region, we're in Region 8. We have to select a candidate, a director for that. There were 8 candidates that put their name in for that position. The last few weeks, the board has, we have looked at a selection. The candidates put some information selections in. They also did a camera interview. And so in the last 2 meetings, we've had some discussions on who we think would be the best fit for that position. And we have decided on Roderick Means. So that's the candidate that we've chosen. Is there any discussion that anybody would like to have regarding that? Mrs. Burton?
Yes, thank you. There were, it's unusual to have 8 candidates.
Yes.
Yes, it's on. Thank you, though. It's unusual to have 8 candidates, and there were several that were very, very qualified. I know one thing that I was looking for is someone who has several years of experience as a school board member in their own district. And at least a couple of people jumped out at me as having many years of experience on their board and having experience with serving at MASB, or Michigan Association of School Boards, which I believe was important. Both Roderick Means and Randall Meisner checked off all those boxes to me, and performed very well also in their interviews. To me, it's a difficult decision, and I believe that both gentlemen would serve well. But I would support Roderick Means because he simply has more years of experience when all other things were quite equal. Mm-hmm. They both seem like they're qualified candidates.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I do want to thank all of the candidates that put their name in for this position. Again, it was very unusual. In the past years, we've only had maybe 1 or 2 actually put their names in for director. We've also had a director that's been in there for a couple terms. So she did not run for this position at this time. So it was great to see 8 candidates, and it was a very difficult decision to pick Roderick, but I think Roderick stood out for us as the best candidate. So I think we'll go with that. Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the official nomination of Roderick Means for candidates for the 2025 MASB Board of Directors, Region 8. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 3B, Principals Week recognition. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mr. Johnson?
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolution establishing the week of February 24, 2025 as Principals Week in Livonia Public Schools.
Support.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported
Mrs. Frank.
by Mrs. Frank. Thank you, there were several. By Mrs. Frank for Principals Week recognition. And we're going to hear tonight from Mrs. Jenkins. Hello, Mrs. Jenkins.
Hello, thank you. Good evening, President Bradford, members of the board, Superintendent Oquist. Tonight, we would like to take a few moments to recognize a special group of staff members here in LPS. Each year, our district formally designates the last week of February as Principals Week, giving us the opportunity to pause in our hectic daily pace to say thank you to our 24 principals and our 12 assistant principals. This is a time for us to reflect on the work these dedicated leaders do each day in our schools. Essentially, our principals are everywhere all the time, doing what is best for kids no matter what. We have prepared a special video tribute this year. That was the wacky project I had in mind when I was communicating earlier with some of the principals, and they were all very curious what that meant. So have no fear, it's just a little video. As a side note, you'll see one student, a Frost young lady who wanted to participate in the interview, and it was Spirit Week, and she was dressed as a frat boy, I guess. And so she has, you'll notice something strange. She has, she painted a goatee on her face. And she said, I don't mind. So she's in the video, so I just wanted to explain that. So if we could play the video.
Do any of our friends here recognize?
Oh, yes. First up is Hayes. Who is that you love? What do you like about your principal?
Amazing.
Awesome. Yeah, what do you guys like?
The principal because she's nice.
Anyone else?
They're pretty. I always like our principal. I love my principal, and she's the best one.
Mr. Witherspoon is the best principal because he's very enthusiastic.
He's very good at, Mr. Witherspoon is very good at sports, and he loves coaching his team.
I feel Mr. Witherspoon is like a very good principal because he encourages students to like try their best, but also like provides like like a comfort space and is like strict when he needs to be, and I think that's like great for like other students.
I feel that Mr. Witherspoon is really funny, and he takes care of us really well.
Here at Frost, Miss Wheeler and Mr. Jensen make the school a better place.
Here at Frost, Mr. Wheeler and Mr. Jensen have great communication with their students.
Here at Frost, Mr. Jensen and Miss Wheeler make this school so fun.
Mrs. Casada is a really great principal. She is super funny and bubbly and energetic. I always wave hi to her in the hallway and she's always like, hi! She's also super involved. I see her at a lot of sports events. I see her actually in our classroom. She's super involved and she's just a total sweetheart.
Here at Franklin, I appreciate the work that Mr. Pacey and the whole administrative team do in making sure students receive a good education and are supported in everything they do academically, personally, and are to grow.
Thank you, Emily. Yes. So my apologies. I guess goatee ended up on the cutting room floor, as they say. Gee, I was like, where is he? But just in case, I thought I would offer that disclaimer. As we all know, being a principal is equal parts fun, as you could clearly see from a lot of the photos. Fostering relationships, making connections with the community, and of course, being a champion for academic achievement. Our principals are dedicated to the professional learning community, or PLC, journey by serving as role models for their staff to engage in meaningful teamwork on a consistent basis. This dedicated time not only strengthens staff connections and professional growth, but benefits student achievement in many ways. We are proud of the growth of our PLC work in Livonia Public Schools, and we have our principals to thank for this success. Our school leaders also come together for their own learning through our administrative leadership team, known as ALT. This powerful collaboration of great minds, passionate ideas, and caring hearts, and we are so fortunate to have these leaders at the helm of our district schools. They are always learning and leading in their own very unique ways. Our principals also serve as the focal point and they set the tone within their individual school community. They recognize the importance of connecting with students, staff, and families by forming relationships that foster a true sense of belonging in our schools. With academics, collaboration, and the climate and culture of their school at the center of all that they do, our principals are simply the best. We are lucky to have just a handful of our leaders have joined us this evening, so please stand to be recognized. Buchanan Elementary School Principal Jen Wilson is in the audience. Thank you for being here. Hoover Elementary Principal Mike Daraskovich, also known as Mr. D. Stevenson High School Assistant Principal Paul Kennedy. Frost Middle School Principal Shannon Wheeler. Stevenson High School Assistant Principal Christina Abajamra. Franklin High School Assistant Principal and co-president of the principals organization called LEADS, Dennis Garathy. And last but not least, Rosedale Elementary Principal and also co-president of LEADS, Ben Hillard. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. As we do each year, we've prepared a special resolution to recognize next week as Principals Week here in Livonia Public Schools. And if I could ask Mr. Mark Johnson, Trustee Johnson, to join us at the podium along with Mr. Garathy. Mr. Johnson will read the resolution we've prepared and present it to Mr. Garathy. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Before I begin, I just want to thank all of our principals. You guys keep our kids safe every day. You have a welcoming environment. You're a guiding light for all of our kids. You are just what we can't express how fortunate we are to have the principals that we have that make LPS the best that we think is in the state. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. And now it is my privilege to read the Principals Week Resolution, Livonia Public Schools Board of Education, February 18th, 2025. Whereas Principals Week is dedicated to recognizing the significant contributions of Livonia Public Schools principals in the commitment to providing quality educational experiences and guidance for their students. And whereas energetic and inspiring school leadership is essential if schools, teachers, and support staff are to implement college and career-ready standards and assessments, and whereas school principals play a vital role in the success of students and act as the liaison between the school and the community it serves, and whereas we join with educators, parents, students to raise awareness of the importance of educational leadership. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the trustees of the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education recognize the week of February 24th, 2025 as School Principals Week and encourage all citizens to thank and support the efforts of school principals in our community. Greatly appreciate it.
Superintendent Oquist and Cabinet and School Board of Livonia Public Schools. I'm honored to accept this on behalf of my LEADS colleagues, those that came tonight, those that couldn't make it. We are a special group. We love working with students. And some days are good and some days are challenging. These are challenging times. We have a lot of decisions that have to be made, but we do it collectively and collaboratively, not on an island or just arbitrarily. We do it together, and we appreciate the relationship that we have with the superintendent, with the board, and with the cabinet. And we have a lot of great colleagues in the district, a lot of great relationships, and we pride ourselves on those relationships. And Stacy and Emily, great job on the video. If that's what you meant by wacky, then we accept that. But we love our community, and we hope that parents continue to trust us. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made on a daily basis, and some of them quickly, and some of them take a little more time to resolve. But we trust that our community trusts us as we partner with them, and we thank you again for this honor.
And that concludes my presentation, but it does not conclude our appreciation for our principals. So make sure if you're in our schools next week, make sure you give a high five, give a wave, give a smile, and give a thanks to our principals. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Oh, boy, lots of them. All right, let's start with Mrs. Frank.
Thank you. Well, you have our heartfelt gratitude on behalf of the Board of Education, and personally as a parent in the district, thank you for all that you do, the way that you lead with professionalism, but also with your hearts, and that you serve our students and that you have the best in mind for our kids. And daily you come to work on those hard days that Dennis spoke about, and you do the hard things and you make the hard decisions for the best, in the best interest of our kids and our families. And so we're so grateful that you do make those hard decisions, and we trust you. And we know that we have one of the best principal teams in the state, and so we're so grateful for you, and thank you for all that you do.
Oh, that's so nice. Mrs. Burton.
I've said this before at this time of year when we are specifically honoring our principals, but I think it bears saying again. The one thing that I really think is a unique role of a principal is setting the tone of the building. The principal is in that unique position of working with staff and students and parents all at the same time, which can be quite a juggling act on some days. But you are in the wonderful role of really setting the tone. And each level of education, whether it's elementary, upper, middle school, and high school, they need different tones. They have different expectations. Our kids at different ages, and our parents, who are parents of children at different ages, really need different things from our schools in terms of that kind of support. But thank you so much for setting the tone for our buildings, for being the leader and in charge of that building, but also doing so with a welcoming spirit and making sure that our families know that they belong in Livonia Public Schools at whatever level that the children may be in. That setting the tone is always, it's so important, and it really truly makes a difference, building to building and individual to individual. But thank you so much for the work that you do for our families in the district.
All right, thank you. Mrs. O'Quist, would you like to speak?
I would. Are there any other board members
Well,
that would
I
like
was
to
going to
speak?
say something, but I'll say it after you.
Okay, that
Did
sounds
anybody
great.
else
Thank
like to
you.
speak? Okay, everybody spoke so well. Okay,
Did Mark want to say something?
I did.
Yes, please.
But you can.
No, please.
go
Let the
Mark,
board
you're
go.
up.
Yeah, it sort of hit me when I was watching the video that we can sit here and, I guess, now I can't think what I'm going to say. We can praise you all we want, but when we watch the videos and we watch the kids and how much they feel about their principals, it says something totally different than what we say here at the board table. And I think that says a lot about the job that you folks do for our kids. Thank you.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? It really
Yes.
is, Mr. Johnson, when that really is where the reward lies, is with the students, that we have the privilege of touching their lives and impacting them. And Mr. Garrity, I thought you said that so beautifully, because this job is magical. It is also a huge responsibility. It's both a privilege and a responsibility, and we know that our principals each day work with the best intentions. And there are many decisions to be made in a day, and there is a great deal that our principals are responsible for, from learning to safety to a child's feelings, to a family's involvement. There are so many different elements, and having had the privilege of serving in that role for many years, I have such an appreciation for what each one of you do every day, and you come back the next one even after those really tough days. And so we know how much of your heart and soul that you put into this. That shows, and there are days when we get it all right, and there are days, boy, that are tough and maybe we didn't. And I know that there's no one harder thinking about that than our leaders themselves. So in addition to our amazing principals and assistant principals, I'd love to also include our athletic directors, our coordinators for student services, our coordinators for academic services, and our leaders across the district who are all a part of LEADS, the organization that you represent. We truly think we have the most exceptional leadership team across the state. It shows in everything you do, big and small. So thank you. We're so proud of you, and we're so excited to have so many of you here tonight. So thank you. And Mrs. Jenkins, to you and Emily, thank you for a great video. It's always, the best is hearing from our kids. We, right away, our Webelos recognize their school, and they recognize some of their classmates. So that was a pretty cool connection. Thank you.
It was a lot of fun. I wish we could have made it to every single building.
Yes. And I just wanted to say thank you for the time and dedication you put into your work, because as a principal, it's a 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week job. I mean, people think the principal goes home at night, and I'm sure you have some restless night's sleep thinking about what's going to happen the next day or how things are going to go. So it's not just a 8 to 4 job for our principals and our leaders. It's constant. You have families you're concerned about. You have joyous occasions that you're putting together. So we really appreciate all the time that you put into your work. And so thank you, and happy Principals Week. I hope everybody enjoys the week and the rest of the year. So we thank you on behalf of the Board of Ed. And with that, we have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Frank, for Principals Week recognition. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. All right, moving on to item 3C, the district update from the superintendent. It's one of our favorite times of our meetings. We're getting an update. Mrs. O'Quist, are you ready?
I am ready, President Bradford. Let's go.
All right.
All right, and I see Ms. Thompson has it up on the screen, so here we are. We're going to start with highlighting some learning and growing across our district. So recently we celebrated, how many days have we been in school?
102.
Excellent. Yes, 102. We can't forget the 2.
Yeah.
We missed a few, unfortunately, but we did pass the 100-day mark last week, and there were celebrations across the district. Here you see some of our kiddos from Randolph on the left and from Frost on the right, celebrating being 100 days smarter. We are really enjoying the new addition of the guitars class to our upper elementary and middle school and high school programming. And here we have some of our students from Riley. As you know, our students are getting a chance to have instruments, all instruments, across their year in 6th grade. As you can imagine, guitars are one of the favorites. So we are happy to share Mrs. Danke and the cool things she is doing over at Riley. Bless you. Here we have our LCTC Advanced Med students learning first aid skills. I think one of the neatest things is how many of our students become certified when they are part of the program. So just this year, over 250 students will be certified in first aid and utilizing the AED by the American Heart Association. So what an impact, because really, once you have that training, even though you get refreshers, once you've had it, generally those skills will stay with you. So outstanding that this is one of their areas of focus. And amongst some of the tough weather that we had, we were able to get in our freshman nights at each of our high schools. So here you will see some of the offerings at Franklin. As you may remember, for those of you who've had students go through high school, members of our administrative team start with all of the parents, usually in the PAC, and gives an overview about what 8th grade parents can expect and students can expect the next year when they start high school. And then it's wonderful to have our extracurricular club sponsors and athletic and activity sponsors there, often with tables, displays, and students who are participating in those groups there to talk about what will be offered to the class, the graduating class of 2029. So here we have Franklin and Churchill and Stevenson. And so it's great to have many of our current high school students there because, again, hearing directly from other students is a really neat opportunity to understand some of the choices that they'll have, some of the opportunities and what that will entail, and also just learning about the depth and breadth of what's going to be offered in high school. So thank you to our high school administrative teams and staff members for putting that on for our families. 6th grade camp, this is that time. We have many 6th graders from across the district making their way out to camp and having just a wide range of activities to enjoy. There's often a lot out in nature, no matter if it's spring or winter camp. And so it's really a great time for bonding with classmates and learning some new adventure skills and really some great life skills as well. So thank you to all of our parent volunteers who help with this, the fundraising that is done, often in conjunction with our PTAs, and then our staff who spends the night out there. I have done that as a teacher and as a principal, and it is for the hardy, that is for sure. It is for the hardy. You sleep well once you get home. So our amazing LPS Education Foundation had Dollars for Scholars dinner. It was our first annual evening event, and it was just an amazing fundraiser. I want to acknowledge Mrs. Jarvis, who is the president of our LPS Education Foundation, and her team who put together this amazing event. Mr. McFarland, you see featured here, donating some books to the cause, and we had our entire board there as well. So it was a great opportunity to gather supportive members of our community to raise money for the Competitive Edge Scholarship Program. We also had a chance to hear from a children's author, and we did collect books for her effort as well. Great job, Foundation folks. And I'm sorry, please.
And honored an alumni of the district.
Yes, we did. That was very nice. We are getting ready for Phantom of the Opera. We have some great shows coming up. So you know how, I'm sure you have some idea of how much goes on behind the scenes. So here is some of the crew hard at work. They are often the ones who may not get the recognition the same as those on stage. But the CAPA program recently had a huge thank you to Tech Director Mr. Cole for all that he's doing to design and build and teach in order to prepare for the February 28th through March 2nd. The CAPA will be hosting and presenting the Phantom of the Opera. So tickets are on sale now. I have no doubt that those will be sold out. You can go online with your QR code, not only purchase the tickets, but pick your seats. So please be sure to join us for that. And speaking of Churchill, is this not the most adorable thing? Churchill's Glamour Girls Club took time to visit a local senior community center and spent time pampering the ladies there. It was the club's first visit, but they said it will not be the last. So you see them interacting with some of the young ladies at the senior center, painting their nails and spending some time with them. And I think that time was enjoyed by everyone. we have some kudos. First, we have some Frost student musicians. I'll try to say that 3 times. They participated in the prestigious Michigan Music Conference in Grand Rapids. So Emma Howie was selected as one of 71 middle school orchestra students to perform with the MSBOA Middle School All-State String Orchestra. That is a huge honor and a huge accomplishment. And we have Vanya Sristafa was one of 19 students from K-12 to have an original composition selected for the Young Composers of Michigan Premier Concert, which was hosted by the Michigan Music Education Association, which you might recall last month I highlighted, I believe, 5 or 6 of our music teachers who were presenters at the Michigan Music Education Conference. So what a huge honor for our students, and so proud of our Frost students who are recognized in this way. And Rotary does a wonderful job. Are we on Rotary, or did I skip one? Math Scholars. We have more Frost students to highlight. The Math Club members were highlighted at the Detroit Country Day Middle School Math Invitational. This team earned a perfect score in the team competition and won 5th place in the tournament overall. So way to go, team. Love it. And here we have the Rotary Vocational Award. As you know, our amazing Rotary Club of Livonia does a very nice job of highlighting some of our vocational students who are usually from the Livonia Career Technical Center or in a CTE program at one of our high schools. And so we do have one of our students here from Franklin, Anthony Fora, who received the Vocational Services Award. We were very, very pleased to honor him and very pleased to have Mrs. Gray and Mr. Pacey and I believe Mr. Francis as well. Were you there as well, Mr. Francis? Yes, thank you. So congratulations to Anthony. What a wonderful young man. You've heard of Fleece and Thank You, a great organization that provides blankets to children who are in the hospital, a little extra bit of comfort during a difficult time. And so usually that happens at our high schools, but Randolph Elementary recently held a blanket making event for Fleece and Thank You. It was their Youth Making a Difference project. So they handmade these blankets, and they were able to share a little bit of love with some kiddos who can certainly use it. And as we are beginning to peak at winter athletes and winter sports season, we had our pom teams from each of our high schools competing at states. So Franklin Pom-Pom finished first runner-up in Division I at the state championships. You remember they were here last year as state champs. They just about did it again, had an amazing performance, and finished first runner-up. Stevenson Pom finished second place in Class A Division II, so way to go to our Lady Spartans. And Churchill Pom performed an amazing routine at state championships, also in Class A Division II. It is a ton of work. In the first part of the year, it is sideline season, and they perform out during football games and at various events. And then in the winter, it's primarily competition season, although they will often perform at a basketball game or guy-girl pom. But it takes a lot of work, a lot of precision, and I want to share my congratulations with all of our student athletes and their coaches. And speaking of success, both our boys and girls varsity basketball team at Stevenson were city champs. So way to go, Spartans. Here are the winning teams who wrapped that up over this past week. So congratulations to Stevenson. We also have some state qualifiers for wrestling. We have Franklin wrestlers Brendan, Jacob, Filippo, and Kennedy Perez, and Luciano, moving on to the state championship. That is huge to have 5 wrestlers moving on, not at all unusual for Franklin, a perennial successful team, but so much hard work goes into that. Wonderful to see so many state qualifiers. And we also have a state qualifier from Churchill as well. Christian Hollow will be moving on to the upcoming state championship. He and Manny both made it to regional finals. Oh, I'm on the next slide. There you go. Christian and Manny both made it to the individual regionals, and Christian is going to continue on to the state championship. Huge successes. That's a lot of work to get to that point, and that will be an exciting match for sure. Finally, mark your calendars. The Garfield Garments store is open for business. So this is a cost-free store at our Garfield Community School. It is run by our students from Garfield, and it is meant to assist local families with their clothing needs. So the garment store will be open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:45 to 8:30 a.m. and 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So first thing in the morning and then right after lunch, if you think about it that way. There is no cost. We would love to have you come by so our students can assist you.
Can folks donate also?
I believe they are not in need of donations at this time, but they will let us know. We did recently ask them that. And then finally, if you will mark your calendars for next Monday, we have a parent fair focused on school safety and mental health put on by our student assistance providers. So it will be held at Franklin High School. Thank you so much to our Patriots for hosting us. It will start at 4:30 in the PAC. We will also have a presentation by OK to Say, as well as members of our district safety team who will go over, once we get an OK to Say report, how that is dealt with within our schools. We have a very systematic, thorough way that we always follow when we have these situations come up. You'll see the timeline on there, and you can go to the QR code to access more information about the OK to Say program. There will then be an opportunity to network for about an hour with over 20 mental health providers in the area. So lots of great resources for parents. Thank you so much, President Bradford, for letting me share this. And I want to thank again our Hayes Huskies who are here with us tonight. We love having you here. You've done a great job leading us in the pledge, asking great questions with Mrs. Bradford, and enjoying the meeting. Do you have a question? You are so sweet. That is so sweet.
wants
Thank
to
you
do the
so much. That was very nice. And I like your earmuffs.
And Mrs. Oquist, I believe they're going to be speaking at Audience Communications.
Fantastic.
So if you guys can hold tight for just a few more minutes, we're going to take our 5-minute break to congratulate our principals, and then if you can hang tight for Audience Communications, we would love to hear from you. Thank you. We're on a break. Welcome back to the regular Livonia Public Schools Board of Education meeting for February 18th. We're going to go ahead on to item 3D, written communications. I do not have any written communications, so we will go ahead and move on to item 3E, response to prior audience communications. Does anybody have any blues? No, none. We're going to move on to item 3F, audience communications. Audience communications is a time for set aside for the board to listen to the concerns of our community. It is usually not a question or answer period, but rather a time set aside for us to listen thoughtfully. Each speaker has up to 3 minutes to speak. So tonight I have one blue slip, and that blue slip happens to be Laura Rogers, who is the Webelos leader for Hayes Pack 729, and she wanted to come up with her troop and tell us what they're all about and bring the kids up. So thank you for being here tonight. Green, as long as you're green,
you're
good
as
to
green
go.
is working. All right. Good evening. My name is Laura Rogers, and I am the DUN leader of our 4th grade Webelos and also the committee chair of Pack 729 at Hayes Elementary. We want to thank the Board of Education for having us today and allowing us this opportunity to do the Pledge of Allegiance and let you know of the wonderful things we've accomplished or are doing this year. Our Cub Scout pack includes kindergarten through 5th grade, and my DUN here has 11 students. We're the largest of our pack. My assistant Jessie and we get the privilege to work with these kids every single week. And we teach them about how our country does elections, to cooking skills, different types of art, camping skills, nature, and many other topics, along with service projects throughout the year. And of course, we have fun while doing this. Matthew will be talking about our big service project coming up this year in March. And Ian over here will be speaking on some of the exciting things we've already done this year.
Awesome.
I am excited to tell you about our service project coming up March 22nd. I am very involved with the green team at Hayes and our entire pack. We will be digging out the top layer of grass, building the garden beds, and placing and filling those beds for planting. This was all thanks to the foundation and the grant Ms. LaCase received last year. The Webelos Den last year also made butterfly houses and will be donating some of those to the garden to help protect those pollinators.
Great.
Earlier this year, Webelos then made cards, letters, and pictures and sent them to North Carolina Service Project to be distributed to teachers, emergency workers, and people affected by Hurricane Helene. I think that's how it's pronounced. Our pack also held a cake bake in January. We bake the cake and decorate the cake at home. We bring it to our pack meeting, and at the end of the meeting, each family donates a cake to a local business and first responders in our community.
How nice. Yes, great job.
If the board has any questions, I know it's not question and answer, but I know Mrs. Bradford said she had a couple. I'm happy to answer them. But I did also want to mention a little plug on May 10th. It's a Saturday. We're having our 2nd annual bottle drive. So if you have any cans or bottles you guys don't want to take care of, please bring them to Hayes Elementary on the bus circle drive on that Saturday, and we'll be collecting them.
May 10th.
Yes,
right?
May 10th, Saturday.
Can bottle drive. At Hayes?
At Hayes, the
Okay.
bus circle drive, because the school's obviously closed that day. We're doing it from 10 to 3? 10 to 3, I think. I can
10
double
to
check
3.
that, though. You're welcome. Otherwise, we want to thank you guys for this time and meeting with Mrs. Bradford earlier, and appreciating this time to speak to you guys.
Thank you so much. Did anybody have any questions or comments? Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you. Thanks for coming, guys. My son used to be in Scouts. He went all the way to Eagle Scout, but he started out as a Tiger, and he was in the same position you guys are in right now, learning a lot about your community. and what you can do with it within the community to make it a better place. I love what you guys said you're going to be doing, working with Mrs. Lakatos to help with the green efforts over at Hayes. She is so lucky to have guys like you and gals helping out. I can tell you're strong and that you're hard workers, and I'm sure that she appreciates that kind of help. Thanks for doing what you do.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis.
We'll be there, a number of us will be there in April when you raise the flag for the special day that Mrs. Lakatos is planning.
Oh,
Yes.
Over there, be sure to come up and say hi, okay?
I'm hoping to get the day off.
Oh, you too. We'll look forward to
Yes.
seeing you guys then.
Yes, thank you so much for coming in, and thank you, kids, for your questions. Your questions were so great earlier this evening. I really appreciated meeting with you, and I want to thank Mrs. Jenkins for the swag bags that everybody got. Each of the Webelos got a beautiful knapsack bag filled with a lot of different items. So enjoy those, and I hope you guys have a really great year, and thanks for all you guys are doing. Also, thank you for the parents for supporting your children through scouting and extracurricular activities. That's really great. Thank you so much. So
Keep going with it.
yeah, keep going, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Mrs. Jenkins, are those cool sunglasses from us? Wow.
Yeah, the sunglasses were LPS, I think. I know. Yeah, they're lovely. Very cool. All right, we are going to go ahead and move on to item 4, our consent agenda. And let me pull that up. May I have a motion, please? Item 4, consent agenda. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the following consent agenda items as recommended by the superintendent. 5A, minutes of the regular meeting of January 27, 2025.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the consent agenda. Is there any member of the board who wishes to remove that item from the agenda? Seeing none, we will go ahead and take the vote. We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the consent agenda. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mr. McFarland,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford,
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 6, our business matters. I have item 6A, the approval of purchase of LMC furniture. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Frank.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation from the owner's representative, Plant Moran Real Point, and approve the Phase 4 purchase of furniture for the library media centers at Buchanan Elementary School, Grant Elementary School, Johnson Upper Elementary School, and Churchill High School from NBS Commercial Interiors, Troy, Michigan, in an amount not to exceed $1,345,000.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of purchase of LMC furniture. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mr. Francis.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
We have, as the motion mentions, $1,345,000 as a not-to-exceed item for furniture, which is a planned item from the 2021 bond. As the board has seen the past few years, as we come into the summers, we have this package for furniture that's going to go, quite a bit of it in the LMC, could be other places as well. But this is mostly the LMC proper, but as well as the ancillary items next to them, such as the flexible classroom. This will cover items such as soft seating, more traditional hard seating for students, and tables, rectangular tables, booths, et cetera. It's sort of like the whole gamut of what you see, like we have been at some of our study sessions at the LMCs that were done last summer. In this year, just something to point out, as mentioned at the Committee of the Whole, we've also put in the bookshelves into this package. So this number is a little higher than traditionally because we've had the bookshelves in a separate package because we had to do them earlier in the past based upon a longer lead time. We're in a good shape with the lead time now, so we just put it all into a singular packet.
Great. Any questions or comments? Mrs. Burton?
One thing I think is important to note too is that some of this furniture really acts almost as part of the construction. When our LMCs are large spaces, the furniture really breaks up that space, and we knew from the very beginning that some of our costs that we would normally be attributing to construction is really going to be in the furniture package, which is why it's some of the function of that furniture is to break that huge space up into smaller, more usable subsets. So that does take that cost to drive it up a little bit. But
Excellent point.
Think of it as some construction dollars in the furniture budget.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of purchase of LMC furniture. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 6B, the approval of contract for installation of field lights. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the recommendation to award the installation of LED retrofit lighting for Churchill High School, Franklin High School, and Stevenson High School to Airport Lighting, Luther, Michigan, for a total cost of $192,850, which includes a 6% contingency.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of contract for installation of field lights, and we're going to hear from Mr. Francis.
Thank you again. This is a continuation of the athletic and physical education improvements through the use of the capital funds project that we've been doing. This piggybacks on last month's purchase of the actual lighting itself that the board had approved. And so this is specifically for the installation. There is a bit of a contingency in there based upon conversations with Mr. Lau and anticipation of when you start doing that work, it's possible that something can get run. We could run into something and might need contingency dollars for that to get repaired or fixed or taken care of. So that's the reasoning for the contingency. And airport lighting has been, or airport electrical has been in the district in the past. They've worked well with us, and they were the low responsible bidder in the bid.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Burton?
When do we think the lighting is going to be completed?
We are, it'll be complete. We're going to get a better feel for it once we have airport under contract, but we have the goal and really a confident goal of having everything done at the 3 high schools in time for the new fall season, which starts in August of '25.
Excellent, thank you. For folks who may not have seen the committee of the whole meeting or been around for the study session, it's exciting seeing what how well lit it is, but also some of the perks that come along with it that can go along with when goals are scored and points are scored and so forth. So if you've not had the opportunity to do it yet, stop over at some of the high schools for some of their athletics in the fall and see it. It's really cool.
Mrs. Frank?
I agree. It is amazing. Mr. Francis, just one follow-up. We talked about like the auxiliary lighting or the lighting that might be lost in different spaces around the stadiums. If we have to add lighting, is that number in here, or I know that you were meeting with some of the athletic directors to find, is that number in here, would that more come out of sinking fund? Where would those lights come, or just operational budget?
Correct.
Okay.
This is not, that we're treating those as two separate from a fiscal standpoint, two separate items. Airport is going to be working on the installation of the Musco lights. Our team is going to work in conjunction by our team, I mean the operational and maintenance teams, are going to work in conjunction with the principals, the athletic administrators at each high school, and we'll take care of the other ancillary lighting, whether it be a repair or a replacement or a new light.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of contract for installation of field lights. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 6C, the approval of purchase of dust collectors for LCTC. May I have a motion, please?
Mrs. Bradford,
Mr. McFarland.
move that the Board of Education of Livonia Public School District approve the recommendation to award the purchase and installation of a dust collection system to the construction trades classroom at the Livonia Career Technical Center to Allied Building Service Company, Detroit, Michigan, for a total cost of $114,000, which includes a 5% contingency.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. McFarland, supported by Mr. Johnson, for the approval of purchase of dust collectors for LCTC, and we are going to hear again from Mr. Francis.
Thank you once again.
Yep.
This is work that's going to be done at, as mentioned, the Career Technical Center, and the dust collector is not, it's not a replacement, it's actually new. We've not had one in there. A little bit of quick history for those who weren't around for the committee of the whole meeting. The space that is currently the construction trades space was not originally that, so it wasn't originally meant for that. So we are coming in to put a dust collector into that space because they do generate quite a bit of sawdust, et cetera, in that room. Our supervisor of maintenance, Mr. Roberts, was heading this one up, and his recommendation is a 5% contingency on this, because once they start installation, this involves electrical and some other items. So if they run into something in a wall, we would have a few dollars to be able to work on those. This has been bid out through Omnia Partners, so it does satisfy our requirements to bid. This is very similar to when we do the furniture from few minutes back, where we go through the contract pricing, which has been bid out to these companies with the discount. So we are looking forward to this. I know that the Livonia Career Technical Center's principal, the construction trades teacher over at LCTC are both very excited about this upcoming improvement.
Great. Thank you. Any questions or comments?
And one last item, I didn't mention it, it is in the budgetary information, but this is a sinking fund project.
Yeah. Sounds like that's going to be very helpful to
Yes.
their program, for sure. All right, we have a motion by Mr. McFarland, supported by Mr. Johnson, for the approval of purchase of dust collectors for LCTC. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 6D, the approval of purchase of hydration stations. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Burton.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of 40 hydration stations for various buildings in the district from Ferguson Facilities Supply, Newport News, Virginia, for a total cost of $61,776.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the approval of purchase of hydration stations. And once again, Mr. Francis.
Thank you again. And following the development of our drinking water management plan, which has come about through the Filter First of the state of Michigan's requirement, we are simply making a purchase of what we call hydration stations and what the state calls hydration stations. Oftentimes, people just call them the bottle fillers that are in the buildings that we currently have. We have that one right outside the door here in our lobby outside of the boardroom. So this is just simply a purchase of 40 of them to hold in the warehouse, and we'll then have them in hand and in stock as we move along with this project through our buildings. in order to meet that requirement of the Filter First of Michigan.
Thank you. Mr. Francis, is this the total number of them, or will we be receiving more of those in the future?
We will be ordering more. We wanted to have a first batch of them on hand.
Okay.
We know that during this summer, we'll be doing some of these in the bond school buildings over the summer while we have contractors in there. We've been working with French to tie in that work with regard to having plumbers on hand already, electricians on hand, et cetera. We can do some work in those areas. Our team is also working with a plumbing company and electrical companies to go into other buildings to add them in as well. So it's really sort of chipping away at it, which is why we want them on hand to be able to easily say, we can go into a building and get that installed when that contractor or those contractors are ready to go.
Great, thank you. And I know that because this is a requirement per the state, many other school districts are going to be out purchasing hydration stations. Would it be prudent of us to purchase even what we need soon so that we don't run into a problem with having access to those hydration stations? Because I do know there's a time limit, isn't there, on when we must have those all put in.
All of that is spot on, and that's exactly why we're making this our first large purchase. We've got, fortunately, as a larger district and working in a metropolitan area, we have good connections with the companies and our suppliers. That is how we're able to take this large bite of the apple at this point and get a whole bunch, and then continue that relationship. And when we need more, we can order more.
Yeah.
We also have, and on this as a side note, but very much related to this, the filters we also have been getting from Ferguson, and those were obviously a much smaller cost. So we already purchased also some gross of those to continue to put those in those K2 classrooms as we've discussed in the past. So I really feel that this is that as a district we are making strides, following our plan with our partner Arch Environmental, and have already begun this. And I think that we're on a good track to get this work done as required. And if I didn't mention it, I'd rather say it twice than not at all. The funding for this is from the Filter First grant from the state of Michigan.
Great, and I want to thank you, and the board does, for your due diligence, because we do know there's a timeline on this and that we don't want to get caught not having everything put into place before the deadline. So thank you to you and your team for being right on top of it for us. So
thank you.
We appreciate that. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the approval of purchase of hydration stations. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. We are going to move on to item 7, Instruction Matters 7A, the approval of limited schools of choice 105-105C for the 2025-2026 school year. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mr. Johnson.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent to participate in limited schools of choice under Section 105 and 105C for the 2025-2026 school year. Openings to include 40 seats for kindergarten, 5 for grade 1, and 1 seat for grades 2 through 6, with a minimum of 50 total seats for the 2025-2026 school year. This limited schools of choice window includes all elementary schools, as well as Niji Eero and Webster ACAT, which have testing/admissions requirements.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of limited schools of choice 105, 105C for the 2025-2026 school year. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mr. Green.
Hello, thank you to the Board of Ed for your time and questions at our study session earlier this month and our Committee of the Whole meeting on February 10th. Great questions. We had a lot of discussion at our study session and last week at our Committee of the Whole, so thank you for those questions and allowing me to have some follow-up with you. So as you just heard, we have been offering limited schools of choice since the 2014-15 school year. Since that time, limited schools of choice has brought additional revenue to the district during an era of declining enrollment. In addition to the additional revenue, those strategic school of choice placements have helped balance class size and enrollment gaps at various locations throughout our schools without negatively impacting class size. As we discussed at those past two meetings, placements of schools of choice students helps us reduce the possibility of kindergarten overflow in combination classrooms. I'm on a 5-year streak. We can do this another year. We will run limited schools of choice windows also this spring at Nijiiro and Webster, as you've heard, and there is criteria for entrance into both of those programs. So if the Board of Education approves this recommendation for next year, the application window opens on March 1st, 2025, closes on March 31st, and then on April 11th, there would be a publicly recorded lottery that would take place as needed for certain grade levels. These timelines for all these timelines would then be posted on our website.
Great, thank you. And I do know there was quite a bit of discussion at the Committee of the Whole, for sure. So if anybody has any questions or concerns, please go back to that meeting to watch that. But does anybody at the board table wish to make any comments or questions? Mrs. Burton.
Just to make sure that the folks listening from home understand, we are looking at accepting 50 students. We have the ability as a district to legally exceed that if it fits with the openings that we have at various grade levels.
That is correct. Yeah, we had a lot of great discussion on that, and so Ms. Major and Pupil Accounting and myself, we went through the law, we contacted people at the state, and if we say we're going to take 50, we can go over that if there are spots allowed, but we would put those on a wait list, but we definitely can go over that if that's our number and there's spots available.
Okay, great. All right, thank you so much. And thank you very much for working with this wording. I know this
Oh,
one
yeah,
took a lot of
absolutely.
tweaking back and forth to make sure that we had it right, but
No, I appreciate it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Frank.
And so I just want to be clear, we talked about this, I got another question about this week about the only way to get into one of our high schools from students out of district is a magnet program that usually there's testing in and out. But we don't have any way for out-of-district students to come in middle school and in high school. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to make sure that folks know that, because I think that sometimes there's some confusion about intra-district and that sort of thing. And so we
Yeah.
are focusing on our own community students for middle school and high school, and these are the openings in elementary.
Yep, as we spoke about, we've scaled back our choices in 105, 105C over the years, and when it started in 2014-15, there were seats at middle school level, and for our Kappa and Global Ed, and over the years, we've scaled that back to focus on elementary, specifically our earliest grades in elementary.
And I appreciated the discussion on that, because I think you're doing it in a very wise manner, and so I appreciated all of our debates and discussion about how that looks and what that looks like, and I think we got to a really good number.
Mrs. Burton.
Again, in case folks are listening from home, one important feature of School of Choice is that the parents or families are responsible for transportation.
That is
Livonia
correct.
Public Schools does not provide transportation for students coming from out of the district.
Correct.
Thank you. Mrs. Acosta.
I just wanted to add, I know that in beginning your conversation about this, it was that this was to support our enrollment because of declining in enrollment. And can you speak on what our enrollment is looking like now, where we're looking at 50 students for limited school of choice?
As far as where they'd be placed?
In terms of is our enrollment declining or stabilizing?
You know, we've had in recent years a decline since obviously the adoption in 2014-15. This past year, we had a slower reduction in enrollment than we had in previous years. However, the trend, if you look at county birth rates from 5 years ago, I think it's the newest low since 2008. So we are trying to predict ahead of time too, and so obviously we're going to see that in about 5 years. When you I think it was the 2023 was the lowest county birth rates since 2008. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. O'Quist?
Mr. Green, could you also briefly describe how you determine, do the parents determine the school, or does the district determine the school?
That's a great question. We determine the school. Obviously, NEJI, ERO, and ACAT is separate because those are unique programs with, again, the entrance requirements. But what we do is we look at those class sizes. Ms. Keats here to my left and myself, when we start our staffing process, we take a look at where do we have positions or placements available, what grade levels, and then we place them. And that's in our application process as well, that we choose the school. And then they're at that school, and then that triad for the remainder of their Livonia school career.
Thank you. Mrs. Burton?
Circling back to declining enrollment, just so folks at home are clear, declining enrollment has been something we're experiencing as a country, and it's directly tied to birth rate. It's not just Livonia Public Schools. And is it still correct that Livonia Public Schools educates approximately 1% of the children born in the state of Michigan? I know that that has been the case for many years. I don't know if it was still.
Yeah.
still accurate.
We're just under that. There are about 1.4 million, and so we're just under 1% of that. Not quite the 1% mark any longer, but just under that. And then, as Mr. Green shared, we once again just recently saw a very, very low birth rate in comparison to prior years. So we know we'll see the impact of that in a few years from now as children enter kindergarten.
Okay.
And again, that's across the state. That's across the state of Michigan.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments regarding the limited schools of choice? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of limited schools of choice 105, 105C for the 2025-2026 school year. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 7B, the approval of LCTC Engineering Lab furniture and technology purchase. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford?
Mrs. Acosta.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of new furniture and technology for the Livonia Career Technical Center, LCTC, Engineering Lab. Furniture to be purchased from Interior Environments, Novi, Michigan, in the amount of $55,786, and new technology from CDWG, Chicago, Illinois, in the amount of $57,476. The total cost is $113,262.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Burton, for the approval of LCTC Engineering Lab furniture and technology purchase. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mr. Etu.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much. As stated, this is for an update and upgrade to the engineering lab at the Livonia Career Technical Center. Some of the items included in the two separate quotes includes new desks, chairs, drafting tables, makerspace tables, stools, and bookcases, as well as a technology upgrade of workstations, curved monitors, keyboards, and mouse pros. Last week, we talked about the two quotes, and the one quote from IE, Interior Environments, had a contingency of 10%. We went ahead and discussed that with IE, and they did remove that contingency. So you see an updated quote from there. But we are looking forward to an updated lab if approved here this evening.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Burton, for the approval of LCTC Engineering Lab furniture and technology purchase. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 8, personnel matters. And item 8A, we have teacher for approval. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Frank.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and offer employment for the 2024-25 school year to the teacher listed on the attached document.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval, teacher for approval, and tonight we're hearing from Mr. Abate.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. So the new staff member we're presenting to the board this evening fills a district need in kindergarten. She's very well qualified to fill the position, and we are confident she will perform at a high level and represent LPS in a manner that is consistent with our shared vision and collective commitments. The position is also included in the 2024-2025 budget. We're pleased to be recommending this talented professional join our LPS family, and with your approval, we are excited to have her working with our students.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Welcome.
Welcome. Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for teacher for approval. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
President Bradford.
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 8B, teacher for tenure. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and acknowledge that tenure status has been granted to the following teacher effective on the respective date. To Jacqueline McPherson, August 16th, 2024.
Correction on the date, please.
Jacqueline McPherson, August 26th, 2024.
Thank you.
Support?
Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Burton.
Should it be 2025?
Oh,
Okay.
No.
no, sorry.
24? Okay.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Burton, for the teacher for tenure. And tonight, we're going to hear from Mrs. Keats.
Yes, good evening. Yes, that date is correct, August of '24. It was a teacher who we missed and wanted to make sure we add and used her correct date. So yes, 2024 is in fact correct.
Okay, good.
Our teacher for tenure on this agenda has successfully completed the district's requirements for probationary teachers, including years of service, evaluations of overall performance, and documentation of student growth. We have carefully reviewed all supporting materials along with the recommendations of our school administrators and have verified that she should be granted tenure status with the Livonia Public Schools. We wish to offer our congratulations for reaching this milestone and look forward to her continued success working in LPS.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Congratulations. All right, seeing none, we're going to move, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Burton, for the teacher for tenure. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 8C, leave of absence. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mr. McFarland.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public School District accepts the recommendation of the superintendent and approve the request for leave of absence as listed below. Kay Campbell, effective March 10th, 2025.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. McFarland, supported by Mr. Johnson, for leave of absence, and tonight we're going to hear from Mr. Abate.
Yes, thank you. The staff member listed in your board documentation is requesting a leave of absence in accordance with their collective bargaining agreement, and we ask you to please approve the leave as presented.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. McFarland, supported by Mr. Johnson, for leave of absence. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 8D, resignations. That's for board information only. We will move on to item 8E, retirements. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Burton.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolutions of appreciation for services rendered by Sydney Canterbury, Patricia Fitzer, and Jill McClinch.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank for the retirements. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Keats.
Good evening once again. Tonight we honor and congratulate 3 members of our LPS family who are retiring from their positions with Livonia Public Schools. As they leave the district, they take with them a combined total of 75 years of experience. On behalf of the administration, I would like to thank our retirees for the dedicated years of service they have provided the students of LPS, and we ask the board to please adopt the attached resolution of appreciation.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Congratulations.
Mrs. Acosta.
I just want to say, I love seeing names that I recognize on this list. And so to Jill McClinch, thank you so much for all the support that you gave me during my time as a substitute teacher at Kennedy. Your love for the students and for teaching was really impactful, and we appreciate you and congratulate you.
Thank you. And to all on the list, there's a couple on here. 25 years of service is a long time to the districts. We thank you and wish you a very happy retirement, for sure. So, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Bradford. I just wanted to note that Ms. Canterbury, in her 27 years, was at 11 different schools.
Wow.
Talk about a jack of all trades.
That's amazing.
She was music.
Yeah.
She was music.
Yeah, amazing, just amazing.
Yeah. All right. Congratulations again. Happy retirement. We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank for retirements. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to 9, hearing from board members. Items 9, hearing from board members. Item A, 9A, the second reading of Board Policy IB, Goals and Objectives. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mr. Johnson.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt a board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy IB, Goals and Objectives.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the second reading of Board Policy IB, Goals and Objectives. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you, President Bradford. This policy, we updated our language for our goals and objectives for our instructional programming. We talked about it at a study session, a committee of the whole, and it was read into the record as a first reading at our last regular Board of Education meeting, and there have been no changes since then.
Great. Any questions or comments? Wonderful. Seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the second reading of Board Policy IB, Goals and Objectives. And Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 9B, the second reading of Board Policy IC, Curriculum Development. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Acosta.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy IC, Curriculum Development.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the second reading of Board Policy IC, Curriculum Development. And again, we're going to hear from Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you, President Bradford. Again, this policy, we updated it. It was last reviewed in 2014. We updated the language for curriculum development, discussed it at the study session, committee of the whole, and read it into the record at the last regular board meeting, and nothing has changed since then.
Great. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the second reading of Board Policy IC, Curriculum Development. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 9C, second reading of Board Policy IG, Counseling and Student Assistance. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Frank.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy IG, Counseling and Student Assistance.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the second reading, Board Policy IG, Counseling and Student Assistance. And we're going to hear again from Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you, President Bradford. Again, this policy was reviewed in 2014. We brought it back up and had conversation and updated the language of this board policy, discussed it at study session, committee of the whole, and read it into the record at the last regular board meeting, and it stands the same as it was a month ago.
Thank you again. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the second reading, Board Policy IG, Counseling and Student Assistance. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 9D, the first reading of Board Policy IDAA, Career Technical Education. Since this is a first reading, this is a board review, and it will have a possible adoption at another meeting. So we're going to hear from Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you again. This board policy, IDAA, was originally titled Vocational Education Programming. We changed it to Career Technical Education. That is what we currently call what we offer our students. And it was last reviewed in 2014, and it was just a single sentence, so we rewrote it, and I'd like to read what our update is.
Yes.
The school district shall offer high school students opportunities to take Career Technical Education, CTE, courses. Career technical courses provide students with the skills and the knowledge they need for post-secondary education and careers. CTE programs will be offered at each high school and at the Livonia Career Technical Center. All CTE courses shall be organized in accordance with Michigan Department of Education Career and Technical Education Standards and Perkins Core Performance Areas.
Okay. Any questions or comments regarding that? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Bradford. I'm just wondering, we end the first sentence by saying Career Technical Education CTE courses, and then start the second sentence by just saying Career Technical Courses. I'm just wondering, for consistency, if we should make it Career Technical Education CTE courses.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that looks good. Question, the Perkins Core Performance Areas, if somebody wanted more information about what that is, would that be referenced down at the bottom possibly, or would they just have to look that up?
I believe it would be referenced on our Michigan Department of Education Career and Technical Education Standards page.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, if I read that, I probably would say, what is that? So, okay, perfect. Any other questions or comments? Oh, Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you, President Bradford. Going back to the same sentence that Mr. Johnson was looking at, where the sentence started with career technical courses, we had defined the term CTE prior to that, and we've used that term after that to start sentences. We could be consistent by simply putting CTE instead of career technical courses. And say CTE
That sounds good.
courses.
That's good. Is that agreeable to everybody? Okay,
I'll make that change.
all right. I like that too. Any other questions or comments regarding this one? Okay, that should be, that was read into the record, so that will be reviewed again or approved upon approval at the next regular meeting. Okay. Moving on to item 9E, the first reading of Board Policy DG, deposit of funds. And that, again, is a first reading, and we're going to hear from Mrs. Smith.
Thank
Good
you,
evening,
President
Mrs. Smith.
Bradford. Good evening. As discussed at the study session and the committee meeting, I'm proposing that we update the title of this board policy. It was depository of funds, and proposing to update that to deposit of funds. And then the board policy originally read, the treasurer of the Board of Education shall deposit the funds of the district in a depository determined by the board. And I'm proposing, of course, to keep that intent, but update some of the lingo so that the board policy would read, the treasurer of the Board of Education shall deposit district funds in a financial institution approved by the board. So no changes since last week when we discussed it at Committee of the Whole.
Okay, thank you for reading that into the record. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that? Okay, that will move on to the next regular board meeting. Moving on to item 9F, first reading of Board Policy DH, bonded employees. And I know we discussed this quite a bit, a little bit of that, and it's Mrs. Smith again.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, we did discuss this at the study session and again at the committee meeting, and we did have some ideas for tweaks for this one. So I'd like to read that for the board and see if that meets your expectations or if you want to make some further tweaks. For the community, I'll read the original board policy, how it read. It said, all persons connected with the administration of district funds shall be bonded in accordance with the law. As we discussed last week at the Committee of the Whole meeting, there are no current laws that require us to bond employees, but we do feel that it's a best practice and something that we want to continue as a district. So the proposed policy would read, the district shall purchase an individual bond or blanket bond that covers district employees involved in managing district funds.
That sounds good, real good.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, everybody's in agreement with that? Okay, that looks great. That also will be placed for the next regular board meeting for the second reading. Thank you. And the last one here, item 9G, the first reading board policy DL, safeguarding district assets. Mrs. Smith.
Perfect, thank you. As we discussed at the study session in the committee meeting, we had discussed updating the title of this board policy from cash in school buildings to the safeguarding district assets. And again, I'll read what the original policy was for the community's benefit and then what we're proposing to change it to. The original policy read, the superintendent or designee shall be responsible to see that administrative regulations are established and carried out so that all monies and equipment within all of the district facilities are safeguarded. Looking, of course, to continue that intent, but with some updated language so that the board policy would read, the superintendent or designee shall ensure the implementation and enforcement of administrative procedures to safeguard all funds, equipment, and property throughout the district.
Yes. So in other words, there is administrative procedures for different items, and so that's where you would ensure that instead of just safeguarding. It's cleaner, I think, to everybody, don't you think?
Perfect.
Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments? Okay. That will go on for the second reading at the next regular board meeting. Thank you, Mrs. Smith. All right, moving on to item, excuse me, 9H, hearing from board members. Hearing this time is set aside if any board members wish to have any information or give any information. Would anybody like to speak? Okay, Mrs. Acosta.
I was wondering, Superintendent Oquist, if you could speak on the child care registration dates. Those are available.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Acosta. I think we're going to invite Ms. Thompson to put back up on the screen some information about child care registration. There's a short part two to the superintendent's update that was included in the final few slides that I inadvertently truncated, so thank you, Mrs. Acosta. This is a really important time of year. In all seriousness, we want to make sure we're getting this out in many ways, and we have our child care offerings at our Livonia Early Childhood Center, and so it is important to note that registration will begin for returning families on March 11th, March 13th for LPS staff, and March 14th for new families. So that will be in regard to child care offerings. And then if we move to the next slide, we will talk about preschool registration. So preschool for the 25-26 school year, registration will begin on March 4th, so just around the corner for returning families, March 5th for LPS staff, and then March 6th for new families. This will include preschool offerings for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, 3-day-a-week, half-day programs for our 3-year-olds, 2-day-a-week, full-day programs for our 3-year-olds, and 5-day-a-week, full-day programs for our 3-year-olds. And then we have full-day offerings for our 4-year-olds on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Tuesday through Friday, or Monday through Friday. There are a plethora of options from which to choose. So we will stick with that. And if you want to learn more than the simple information I'm providing you, on the next slide, you will see that we have an early childhood open house next week. I know many of us will actually be attending a very special event. Coincidentally, the Livonia Chamber of Commerce Leadership an award banquet where actually the district is being recognized for the Early Childhood Center being community beautification and enhancement. Unfortunately, it falls on the same day as the open house, so Dr. Dodge will not be able to join us, but we will have a couple members of our ECC staff there, but she will be holding down the fort with the rest of our team, and we will have an open house to share a lot of information about the center. So just so you know, it is broken up into half-hour segments. The first half hour will talk about fee-based child care options for 8 weeks to 35 months. The next half hour would be fee-based 3-year-old preschool, and then the final half hour is for fee-based 4-year-old preschool. It really is a great opportunity to tour the school, to meet the staff, to hear about the programming. So if you are able to attend that open house, that would be ideal for you to learn more about what is right for your little one. And finally, we will share kindergarten registration begins on Monday, March 3rd. You can actually begin to pre-register online. They will open up on Saturday, March 1st, so sometimes on the weekend. We know our parents have just maybe a few more minutes to be able to do that at home to get that started, and so that will open for pre-registration on March 1st and registration on March 3rd, and then we will also have an opportunity to have parents register for Young Fives as well.
Great, thank you, Mrs. Oquist.
You bet.
That is very important information.
It certainly is.
All righty. Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. While we're talking about getting our kiddos back into school, and I was wondering if Mrs. Oquist would review those times when they shouldn't be coming to school, when we have the flu and cold season so rampant. What are the things we should be looking for?
Yes, oh goodness. It is that time of year, and we actually have a great document, and maybe this is a good thing for us to add to the link this week. It's a document actually called Knowing When to Send Your Child to School. And certainly we want our students to be fever-free without the use of medication for at least 24 hours. That's a really important one. We also encourage parents to really think about the age of their child, and if they think that their child will be able to independently manage their symptoms for a 7-hour day. So if they have, a small cough or a little runny nose, that's usually something kiddos can manage. If they are really feeling miserable or needing to get some extra rest during the day, or having a really persistent hearty cough, and those symptoms would be hard to manage, that certainly is something that parents will want to keep in mind and consider keeping their children home for another day or two. We are taking some extra precautions at this time of year, and our operations and maintenance department is doing extra spraying in our classrooms and wiping down of surfaces like desks and counters and drinking fountains, doorknobs and light switches, so that we can keep our classrooms and our schools as clean as possible, and help keep our kiddos healthy. But really the best thing is to help assess your child's symptoms and whether or not they can manage it for a full day, and certainly to be sure that they're fever-free. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Any other comments this evening? Oh, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
We had an opportunity tonight to recognize our principals, and last month we recognized School Board Month, but I'm not aware that there's a Cabinet Appreciation Month or a School Bus Drivers Appreciation Month, so I just want to take the opportunity to say we appreciate our cabinet, our teachers, our employees, our staff, our bus drivers, our custodian, anyone that has, our secretaries, all of them that go out of their way each and every day to take care of our kids. That makes this district so great. So thank you to one and all.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr. Johnson. That's very true. We appreciate everybody in the district for sure.
You bet.
All right. Any other business before the board this evening? Seeing none, I hope everybody has a great evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.
Thank you.